dollar. Dirt and money, no soul. Had to go and get it, ain't no time to kick it. Got a stack of flip for my foes. Dollar. Please tell me you can hear me. Don't turn your back and don't neglect me. Just let me know if you need me. Dollar. Let me watch out for my partners. Keep my money long, get my team strong. Let me run away from my problems.
Yo, what's good, original? Ooh. It's your boy DJ New Kid, your girl.
Sierra Nicole.
We're back on the channel with another
Kid and C original.
I thought you gonna follow me.
On the other side, you wanted to.
Welcome back to the channel, man. We got Mr. Ballen. This is the most highly requested video we have right now of Mr. Ballen. And this man is the reason the death penalty exists. Mature audience only. If you're not mature enough, and I don't care how old you are, but if you're not mature enough, go ahead, click out the video. I don't need no, you know what I'm saying? You already know. So, with that being said, y'all asked for it. Y'all been asking for it for a while. Here y'all go. We're going to drop it middle of the week. Y'all know we normally do balling on, you know, when we do it. We like to throw sometimes it at y'all in the middle of the week. So here y'all go, man. Hopefully y'all enjoy. Hopefully we get to enjoy as well. So with that being said, make sure you check out the links in the description box.
Down below.
You already know where to go, man. If you want to first support, you got to do it. Check out down below. Also, if you enjoyed today's video, as always, man, why not? Like it in with a thumbs up and show some love, man. But let's go ahead and get into it. Let's check it out. Let's check out the reason why this man is the reason. Is it the whole death penalty? We'll find out.
We'll find out.
Today's story involves one of the most graphic and upsetting sequences I've ever covered on any story. It also involves harm to minors, so viewer discretion is advised. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload 2 or 3 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please sneak into the like button's house in the middle of the night and unplug their iPhone in the middle of a software update. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's story. In the 1960s and 1970s, hitchhiking became very popular amongst young people in America. Hitchhiking is a form of transportation where you basically get rides from strangers. And so the way it works is a hitchhiker will stand on the side of a busy road and they'll extend their arm out and they'll kind of hold their thumb up, which signals to passing motorists that they want to hitchhike. That's the kind of universal sign for hitchhiking. And then a willing motorist, when they see a hitchhiker, they'll pull up alongside and offer a ride. Now, today, it seems unfathomably dangerous to just hop into a stranger's car, or conversely, for a motorist to pick up a random stranger on the side of the road. But back then, this was considered totally normal and socially acceptable. And so with that in mind, on September 29th, 1978, a 15-year-old girl named Mary Vincent was standing on the side of a highway just outside of Modesto, California, which is not far from San Francisco, California. Mary was a rebellious teenager who had recently run away from her home in Las Vegas, Nevada. Her parents were going through a very nasty divorce and she just couldn't stand to be in the house anymore, and so that's why she had run away. And so she had hitchhiked all the way up to Los Angeles, California, where her grandfather lived. But after only being there for a couple of days, she became unbelievably homesick and wanted to go back and be around her parents and her family. And so one day,
like he did say, hitchhiking is one of the most scariest things, whether it's for the person who's hitchhiking or even the person who
Picking the hitchhiker up.
Yeah, because the craziest things, I know somebody who, you know what I'm saying, I've told you about this, he's willing to pick up anyone, and luckily enough, nothing has happened to him. But we just used to always look, he was an older guy, he was the older mentor when we was younger, but we used to just look at him and be like,
yeah.
You okay with that? Nothing has ever happened, because it's such a scary. And now, even homeless people, anything, it's you quit in your head. You just, because we've been taught and we've been fed so much negative, you just automatically I don't really trust this situation because you never know. And even if you have the most kindest heart, you still have to second guess yourself in those situations because, like, sometimes we see some of the same homeless people, but when you just see this one random pop up, and now they always, you like, where you come from? Like, or they could have just became homeless. So you never know. Like, but it's scary dealing with, like, you know, especially hitchhikers.
Homesick and wanted to go back and be around her parents and her family. And so one day when her grandfather was out, she slipped out of his house and she began hitchhiking back to Las Vegas, Nevada. And so she had hitchhiked from Los Angeles to Modesto, California. That's where the first person was willing to drive her to. And so she was on that strip of highway in Modesto looking for another ride that could take her farther south. She was on this highway with 2 other young hitchhikers. They all had these signs that said going south, so they weren't just holding their thumbs out, they were holding these signs. And so the 3 of them are huddled in a group, they're holding their signs up, and at some point mid-afternoon, this light blue passenger van that only had 1 passenger, it was the driver, he was a 50-something-year-old man, he looked pretty harmless. He pulled over when he saw their signs and he parked on the side of the road maybe 15 feet ahead of where they were. And so Mary's companions stayed where they were, and Mary ran up to this light blue van and she looked through the passenger side window, which had been rolled down, and she asked this guy, hey, can you give all 3 of us a ride? We're going south. And this man, he would look at her and say, I can only give you a ride. I can't give the other 2 a ride. I can only give you a ride. And so Mary is confused because she's looking at this guy and she's seeing all this space in his van and she's thinking to herself, you know, why am I only allowed to go when they're going the same place I'm going and there's plenty of room in this van? But when she kind of gently prodded this man and said, well, you know, are you sure you don't mind taking them too? He just said, look, I will take you, I will not take them. And so Mary said, okay, well, hold on, let me go back and get my bag. And so he stays parked, she leaves the van and she runs back to the other 2 people she was with and, you know, she explains the situation and they tell her, you know, Mary, this is not good. There's clearly something off with this guy. But Mary, even though she too shared this kind of reservation about this guy, she was so desperate to get home. She was so homesick that she couldn't face the idea of having to wait around for another ride, which might not come until the next day or the day after, because not every motorist is willing to pick up hitchhikers. And she just did not want to wait any longer. And so she told her companions that, guys, I'm going to take the ride. And so she says goodbye to her 2 friends, she grabs her bag, and she runs back up to the van, and she hops in the passenger seat. As soon as she sat down and closed the door, this man pulled back out onto the road and started driving, and then he turned and looked at Mary and introduced himself. His name was Lawrence Singleton, and he was 50 years old. And then Mary, you know, she introduced herself, and then they have some small talk, and very quickly, Mary feels at ease around Lawrence. He kind of reminded her of her grandfather. He was very nice, very polite. And so when she started to feel tired, pretty early on in their trip, she said, hey, Lawrence, do you mind if I doze off while you drive? And Lawrence would say, no problem, go ahead, go to sleep. And so Mary turned away from Lawrence and kind of curled up on the seat, and pretty quickly she was asleep. A little while later, when she woke up, she looked out the window and immediately could tell they were going the wrong way. So she turns to Lawrence and says, you know, we're going the wrong way. And Lawrence would say, oh, you know what? I made a mistake. I'll get us turned around. You know, sorry about that. I had no idea. But Mary's thinking to herself, we're really far in the wrong direction. And there's no way he accidentally did this. But she kind of bit her tongue because Lawrence would actually turn around and start going in the right direction. And so they're traveling in the proper direction for a little while, and Mary's totally on edge, but she's careful not to give that off to Lawrence because she doesn't really know this guy. And even though he did make her feel comfortable, she just doesn't really know what his intentions are. And so she's just kind of looking around pretty apprehensively. And then they pull into this stretch of highway that kind of ran through this fairly forested area where very few cars were on this stretch of road. And Lawrence suddenly tells Mary that he wants to pull over because he has to go to the bathroom. He wants to relieve himself. And so Mary kind of apprehensively says, yeah, okay, that's fine. And so as Lawrence is beginning to pull off of the highway, Mary happens to look down at her feet and she notices one of her shoes is untied. And instinctually, Mary just thought to herself, I better make sure that shoe gets tied because I might need to run away from this guy. But she didn't want to reach down and start tying her shoe. It was kind of awkward because the space was small, and she was worried it would be kind of suspicious if she did it. And so she thought, okay, as soon as we pull off, I'll get out of the car and I'll tie my shoe. And so Lawrence, he pulls over, but he doesn't just pull over onto the shoulder of this road. Instead, he pulls into this access road that kind of trails into the forest. And so as soon as he turned onto this road, the alarm bells are going off in Mary's head. She knows something.
Like, it's so much alarming in this situation. It's like your intuition, which
from the jump
told you
listen
don't.
to it.
You know how women are. When their intuition gets to clicking, you know what I'm saying? Like, y'all got to... But, you know what I'm saying? Like, everybody has this sense. And it, like, some people call it their spider senses. You know what I'm saying? That the inside that tingles at you and you like, this like, automatically doesn't feel right. Off. Yeah. Like, something... Like, and then... I'm like, why you get in the car? It's three of y'all. He got this passenger van. There's no way that, and it's empty. There's no way he can't. I would have been like, oh, okay, well, sorry, we'll catch the next available ride. Yeah, he wouldn't have got his victim. You know what I'm saying? You kind of made it too. You kind of made it too easy for him. You know? Yeah.
As soon as he turned onto this road, the alarm bells are going off in Mary's head. She knows something is wrong, but she doesn't really know what to say to Lawrence because he's not talking to her, and she doesn't really want to look at him. And so she's just kind of going over in her head what she's going to do. Is she going to run? Is she going to confront him? She doesn't know. And then eventually, after about a minute or so, when they are far enough away from the main road that no one on that road could see them, they're pretty far into this forest, Lawrence stops the car and he hops out to go relieve himself. And immediately, Mary, she hops out of the car too, and she bends down to tie her shoe. Before she could finish tying her shoe, suddenly something smacked her hard in the back of the head, and it knocked her unconscious. It was Lawrence. He had hid a hammer next to his seat, and when he had gotten out, he did not go relieve himself. Instead, he walked around the vehicle and smashed her in the head. When Mary came to, she realized she was laying down in the back of the van, and as she was looking out the windows, she could see that they were still parked out in the middle of the forest. And then when she tried to move, she realized her hands, her feet, everything had been tied down to the van. She couldn't move. And so as she's wondering what's going on, Lawrence comes around, he opens the back doors to this van, he hops inside, and he begins assaulting her. Mary has no idea what to do. She's a 15-year-old kid, and this guy is on top of her. He's not stopping. And so she just began quietly begging him to please stop, set me free. I won't tell anyone. She just kept repeating that over and over and over again, and Lawrence never spoke back. He just continued the assault for hours and hours. Finally, when Lawrence got tired, he got off of Mary and he climbed out of the back of the truck and he went around and he climbed into one of the front seats and he fell asleep. And so Mary probably tried to free herself from her restraints, but there was nothing she could do. The restraints were tied too tightly. And so for hours, she must have just laid there wondering what was going to happen to her. And then at some point in the middle of the night, Lawrence wakes up again, and without saying a word to Mary, he just climbs out of the van and gets into the driver's seat and then drives the van out of the forest. He drives on the main road for a little while until he turns down another access road that takes them away from the main road, so away from any prying eyes, and he comes to a stop somewhere out in this forest in the middle of this big canyon. Lawrence parks the van, he climbs out and walks around to the back. He opens up the back doors where Mary is laying there whimpering and crying and begging to be set free. He climbs inside and her torture continues for hours and hours until the sun finally came up, at which point Lawrence stopped. He climbed out of the back of the van and he's standing out there and he turns around so he's facing Mary and he reaches in and he undoes her restraints. So he frees her, he pulls her out of the van and stands her up on the ground. And so she's crying, she's beaten, she's bloodied, she doesn't know what's going on. And she just gently says to him, please set me free. And he says, oh, you want to be set free? I'll set you free. And so he walks around this totally destroyed 15-year-old girl and he reaches into the back of his van where there's this toolbox and he pulls out a hatchet. And so he walks back and he's standing in front of Mary, and Mary would have had a fraction of a second to see what was in his hand before, in one fluid motion, he reaches and grabs her left arm with his left hand. He grabs her on the wrist, then he raises his hatchet up and he brings it down on her left forearm, severing her arm off right below the elbow. And so Mary falls backwards to the ground, and she looks down at where her left arm just was. She's in shock. And before she can do anything, Lawrence just walks over, and with his left hand again, he reaches over and grabs her right wrist. And now Mary knows what he's about to do. He's still holding this hatchet. And so she's screaming and she's kicking him as hard as she can to try to get him off of her, but his grip is too strong. And then he begins to chop at her right forearm over and over again. It would take 4 hard...
Oh, God.
No. This is like a move, something you see in a movie. Or like Criminal Minds or something. Like, this is not like what you expect something that happened in real life. So she's alive and you're like cutting her body up while she's alive.
Yeah.
And did she live to tell?
Who knows? I don't know.
Boy, if she survived through this, she's one tough cookie.
Facts.
Like, who would have? Man,
I wouldn't have
is...
Criminal Minds like ever like touch. Cause you know they touch like on real situations and stuff. Like I've never.
This is one of the most graphic ones.
Yeah.
Like,
and then the sound effects alone, I'm like.
Man.
He begins to chop at her right forearm over and over again. It would take 4 hard blows to finally sever her right arm off of her body. And so Mary falls to the ground in a heap. She's bleeding profusely. She's screaming in agonizing pain. And all Lawrence can focus on is that one of Mary's amputated hands was clutched on to his left arm. When he cut off her left hand, it had gripped onto his arm and now it was stuck to him. And so very nonchalantly, he began trying to flick this hand off of his arm. And then finally, when it did come off, he turned and looked at Mary and realized she had gone silent and she was limp and she was laying in a huge pool of blood. And so Lawrence put the bloody hatchet back inside of his van, and then he just walked over to Mary and grabbed her and began dragging her. About 100 feet down the road from the van was a culvert. A culvert is a big tunnel that goes underneath roads. It allows water and runoff to pass by the road without damaging it. And so this particular culvert underneath this access road was built about 30 feet below the surface of the road. And so if you were standing on the road over the area where this culvert was, if you walked to the edge of the road on either side, there would be a 30-foot drop-off down to the opening of this culvert on either side. And so Lawrence dragged Mary all the way over to this section of the road over the culvert and then chucked her lifeless body off the side, smashing it down onto the rocks below. And then Lawrence walked around very carefully all the way down to her body and stuffed her inside of the actual culvert. And then as he was walking away, he said to her, "Now you're free." After Lawrence left, Mary should have been dead. Really, she should have died at several points along this attack. But miraculously, Mary did not die. And in fact, she would later say she vividly remembered the entire attack. She was fully lucid, fully conscious, fully aware for the entire thing, save for the moment when she was knocked unconscious by the hammer. And so she vividly remembered having her arms amputated, and she specifically remembered one particular point in the beginning, before her left arm, the first arm, had been amputated. He grabbed her left wrist, and she in turn instinctively grabbed with her left hand onto his left arm. So she's clutching onto him. And so when he came down and cut her arm off, she began falling backwards, but she remembered thinking to herself, "Why am I falling backwards? I just grabbed onto his arm. I had a firm grip." And then as she's falling, it's like time is standing still. She literally saw her hand still clutching his arm and saw it had been cut off of her body. And then when Lawrence cut off her right arm, despite being in agonizing pain, it's like she instinctively understood that she has to pretend to be dead. Otherwise, she will die. And so she went totally limp. Her eyes were half open, and she watched as Lawrence is flicking her left hand, the one that she thought she had gripped onto when she was falling back. She watched as he shook that hand off of his arm. And then she was limp as he grabbed her and dragged her the 100 feet to the culvert. And she was limp and still and didn't make a sound when he threw her 30 feet down onto jagged rocks, and she broke 4 of her ribs. She was in excruciating pain, but her will to survive was telling her, "Make no sound. take this punishment and you will survive. And then after he left, she remembers thinking, I don't know where he is. He could be waiting up on the road for me. I can't just crawl out and try to save myself because then he might actually finish me off. And so she laid in this culvert in this horrible position, totally contorted, with her arms gone and broken ribs. And then finally, after a while, she started to feel exceptionally tired, and that was from blood loss. And she said there was a voice in her head telling her, you can't go to sleep. If you go to sleep, you're gonna die. And if you die, we can't catch this monster, and he's gonna do this to someone else. And so she had this surge of adrenaline where she decided, I'm gonna live. I'm gonna get out of here. I don't know if he's still up there, but I have to get out and I have to try to save myself. And so somehow she got out of the culvert. And then once she was on the ground, she dug the nubs of her arms into the dirt and attempted to pack the wound with dirt and mud. And then afterwards, she raised her arms up over her head because she didn't want the blood and muscles to fall out. And so with her mutilated arms up over her head, she managed to crawl up this embankment, up onto the road. She's got no clothes on. She's covered head to toe in blood. She's in shock, and she starts running down the highway, and a car would actually come by fairly quickly.
Jeez.
Bro, the vivid picture.
I am picturing
I'm just
everything.
Like,
my gosh.
And it's just like, it's so horrible, bro. Like, the average person, I think, would have caved in. I really feel like the average person would have been like, I can't take this. I have to succumb to my injuries. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know how much fight and will at 15 you have to even survive something like this and not give up? Like, this is, bro, is sick. And is she the first? She can't be the first.
Can't be.
Like, that's crazy.
Onto the road. She's got no clothes on. She's covered head to toe in blood. She's in shock, and she starts running down the highway, and a car would actually come by fairly quickly, but they were so startled at what they were seeing, they didn't stop and they drove on. And so Mary would ultimately run 3 miles on this highway before finally flagging down a passing motorist. It happened to be a young couple, and after they got over the initial shock of what Mary actually looked like, they put her inside of their car and they sped to the hospital. Mary would stay in the hospital for a month, and during that time she would give police all this information about her attacker, about Lawrence Singleton, and using her very detailed description of him, the police were able to come up with a very good composite sketch. And Lawrence Singleton's neighbor happened to see that sketch, and they turned him in. Lawrence was ultimately sentenced to 14 years in prison for what he did to Mary. It was the maximum sentence that the judge could give. The judge wanted to do more, but legally they couldn't. And so Mary, she testified at court. And so after it all ended and he was sentenced, Mary was leaving the courthouse. And as she passed by Lawrence, it was the one time she had to be physically close to him, he turned and kind of leaned into her and said, I will finish the job if it takes me the rest of my life. 8 years later, Lawrence was paroled for good behavior. And so, of course, this terrified Mary, who by now had become a wife and she had 2 sons. And so she's worried that now that this guy is free, he's going to come and finish the job. But Lawrence would not go after Mary. Instead, 10 years after he got out on parole, he would attack another woman, a 31-year-old mother of 3 named Roxanne Hayes. And unfortunately, he would kill her. At Roxanne's murder trial, Mary would actually testify against Lawrence.
And
because of the reason y'all set him free, that was, y'all could have did. Oh, well, the laws. So he
was paroled after 8 years.
After 8 years, he only had what? He was, at the end of the day, he still, even if he was sick from the. So 9 times out of 10, Mary wasn't the first one. To be real, 10 years later, he probably had already did 10 years after. So that's technically 18 years after this attack. So 9 times out of 10, he probably had did it before Mary.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. That's what I'm thinking.
Mary's not the only victim. He's got other victims. This chick was just one that y'all found out about. 10 years between the gap where he got out, he did this to somebody else as well. There's no way possible.
That you doing something like that and Mary's your first one, and then 10 years like you do after no.
There's a gap of a lot of people. He has a lot of victims. Y'all just
nine
don't.
times out of 10.
Y'all just don't know about it.
9 times
And
out of
that's
10.
the reason why people like this of such a video. That's attempted murder. Even though it's rape and attempted murder, that's already calls for the death penalty right there. Because you got two serious assault cases in one from the previous. So I understand why now, you know what I'm saying? Y'all had to come up with something for this guy but y'all should really got him for attempted murder of Mary.
Of Mary, you know?
Not even just, and also on top of that, you know what I'm saying?
Did it say what he was actually charged with?
It never said.
He just said that the max that they could at that time was 14 years.
Yeah. But it's like,
wow.
Y'all, and that's the reason why, especially when people do such vicious and heinous crimes like that, you have to, like, you can't just let them go, because 9 times out of 10, him paroling out, he gonna be on good behavior because he's not want to be in that environment.
Right, especially when you of an age where you can go out and do it. Ain't like you like
and he
on
was
your
older,
last, because he was already in his 50s. What, 55, something like that. He was already in his 50s.
Yeah, he was already older when he went to jail for the assault against Mary. So he's gonna be a good inmate. He's not one of these young inmates that go in and gotta prove he's tough. No. He's like, hey, I'm old. I'm just here to do my time,
and that's it.
And you don't never hear stories of an old head going into prison and they bullying the old head. You don't never hear stuff like that. It's always about the young folks to go in.
Instead, 10 years after he got out on parole, he would attack another woman, a 31-year-old mother of 3 named Roxanne Hayes, and unfortunately, he would kill her. At Roxanne's murder trial, Mary would actually testify against Lawrence, and her testimony is what they used to secure a death sentence for Lawrence. But before he could be executed, Lawrence died of cancer in jail in 2001. When Mary heard that Lawrence had died, she felt very cheated. However, her sons were very relieved to find out that her attacker had died, and so she took some solace in that. Outrage over Lawrence's early release, considering what he did to Mary, and the fact that that early release led to another person being killed, led to the creation of the Lawrence Singleton Bill, which gives judges the ability to give 25-year to life sentences in cases that involve torture. Meaning, under this bill, Lawrence would never have gotten out of prison after what he did to Mary. So that's going to do it, guys. If you got something out of today's episode and you have not done this already, please sneak into the like button's house.
But yeah, that was like the most bizarre case. Like, never heard it. I thought they've been giving out the death penalty for years, to be real, you know what I'm saying? But I guess he has a different type of bill. And I guess that's the reason why, like I stated previously before, since he had did multiple crimes, multiple vicious and heinous crimes, he can be given the death penalty. Because previously before, I think most death penalties from like murder cases and stuff like that. But now I do know that, like, say for instance, it's attempted murder. Also with the rape, you can be given the death penalty, but opposed to, you know what I'm saying? Most of the time, if you just do rape,
because with his, do you have to technically
kill somebody?
Does someone have to die in the act?
Nowadays,
his was just torture.
Yeah,
his was just
heinous torture. Yeah, which would be the attempted murder. Yeah, also with the rape cases and also with the kidnapping. Yeah. He did multiple different charges. Because what we'll get, kidnapping, that's a charge. Mm-hmm. Sodomy, rape, attempted murder, alternate evidence because you took him from one location. So it's multiple charges you can throw up against him that would actually give him a death penalty. Like, again, I personally don't, you know what I'm saying? Death penalty ain't my way to go, you know what I'm saying? But I would like to have had him locked up where he couldn't be able to do it to other people.
But you know something, and I feel like also, when you know what you're saying,
that's just personal. My bad.
No, I was just about to say, and I guess that's why, a lot of people do believe in the death penalty because of situations like this. Because of you only getting sentenced 14 years,
my thing is life.
Out on good behavior.
My thing is life.
Okay, well.
Throw away the key, lock him up in it, you know what I'm saying? You want to be a criminal, you want to be a uncaged animal, you want to be this wild, loose person. You need to be caged up, locked up, throw away the key. We take you, you know what I'm saying, 23-1. And yeah, I know is but some people, that's what you gotta do.
And sometimes it's hard for me in this.
If y'all hear some mowing, it's not like they cutting the grass today. I apologize. But,
and also it's hard for me to believe that after you got out 10 years later, that was like your only victim was you know,
you probably, 9 times out of 10, as soon as you got out, you got somebody.
You know what I'm saying?
Because you were fiending for that. And 9 times out of 10, you look for Mary. You look for her. Because you leaned over. Or were you telling her, like, you're not going to be the only one. Because his thing is, he had to make sure after that, everybody dies. He was like, he can't let somebody survive.
This situation,
Because if I get caught, I messed up. I allowed somebody to survive. 9 times out of 10, he's killed other people.
That's pure evilness.
And to be real, probably scattered the bodies, got rid of people, wasn't able to. You know how many people come up missing?
And you never
find out nothing else about them. You never discover a body. Nothing. You never know nothing.
That's so sad.
And you know how many serial killers are out here, and they walking amongst us? Like, because to be real, people who... I ain't gonna say that. Yeah. I'm finna say, you know where I'm going. I'm finna say people fascination with these vans and shit. But some people do just be looking creepy. You like, out of all vehicles we got now, you choose this little passenger van. That's your gas up high and stuff. You want to cruise dolo cruise around in a passenger van, bro? Like, no, ain't nobody doing that.
The creepy looking ones, that you know. What I'm saying?
Or the ones who got tinted out windows and stuff.
Or have none.
Like, you just be like,
that creeps me out.
And you just buying them. Like, it's different if it's your work van.
That's different. But when
it's your personal style van, I'll just be like, bro, you really chose a passenger van to be your transportation lifestyle, and it's just you. I wish Mary would have one of her initial thoughts and like, because someone was already telling you, don't. But her main thought was, I'm homesick. I would do anything to get home.
Yeah, and I'm so glad. I'm so glad she survived this. But also it makes me think, like, if this didn't happen to her and she didn't survive, he would. Who knows how long he would have been going? Well,
let me say this, to piggyback off that. How many people actually survived and were too afraid to tell their story?
Who knows? But I feel
because that happens a lot too.
That happens a lot, but I also feel like in some situations like this, when they have someone that did survive and now he's in court to be getting sentenced, you do have a lot of people that will come forward to say that it happened.
But this was a while ago. It's different times too. Because back then, I don't think people were too. Because a lot of people was like, I don't want people to know that I went through that. So back then, people probably looked at it like, even if somebody did survive the attack, they were like, I'm not, because I cannot face him again, because they're so afraid.
You do have situations like that.
And that's what I mean by how many people possibly, because everything is a build-up. His first victim, 9 times out of 10, he didn't kill.
Maybe not, no.
Because a lot of times, your first victim, you especially a sexual assault, you're not, but it's a build-up until the point where you start seeking even more. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I'm just talking about as far as, like, the torture she went through. Like,
all of it's torture, though.
No. I'm talking about, like, her arms being amputated. Like, you got to seek some type of medical attention. Like, there's going to be some type of report of something, but... Yeah, but I'm just glad she survived, and it's unfortunate for the other young lady, but I'm...
And then I thought about, I said 15, 31. Because, most people have a MO, right? And most people, like, they like a certain thing. Like, I'm thinking his thing was young girl. Or did he look at the time period? It was like, okay, Mary was 15. How old is she now? It's 18 years later. 18 years later, Mary's in her 30s. So she's so infatuated with her because he wanted her. So he's trying to keep up with how old could she be at this time. I need to, and maybe at the time we don't know what the woman might have looked like.
May have you do have people
And
that are
people
sick like
prey
that.
on
They'll
that.
be like, you favor
my
this person,
my
or
victim
this,
that got
yeah,
away.
that survived. So you
Yeah.
know, I can't get to her. So you're the
closest thing.
That's sad.
And like I said, you know how many serial people out here that keeps walking this earth and keeps being getting victims, and it's sad, man.
It really is.
The world is a very sad place to be because we have so many evil people who prey on the weak, prey on people that they can overpower. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know, man. Y'all spam us up. Let us know y'all thoughts and opinion. This the one y'all asked for. Most definitely was a great one.
Yeah.
I know Criminal Minds tapped on this one. I'm gonna have to look for it though.
Yeah.
Like, cause I know it's been. If it's not them, somebody else has.
Most
so
definitely.
I know it's a story out there.
Maybe, who knows? But yeah.
But with that being said, as always, man, y'all spam us up. Let us know what we should react to next so we can bring it. But as always, y'all know how it go. I do go by the name DJ Kid. This is. We are.
Go and get it, ain't no time to kick it. Got a stack and flip for my foes. Dollar, 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 dollar.